I keep trying to fix my lighting here. It's terrible. I've got this big shiny head, so but nothing I do seems to help it. But I guess we'll just have to make.
It's looking good.
Thanks. And yeah, I see everybody, a lot of people in the chat saying hi to me. Hello, thanks. I appreciate being here. I guess what kind of sets us apart from other companies, I guess, or really what sets Young Living apart are farming practices. And that's the thing that's interesting. We're not really deliberately trying to set ourselves apart. We are who we are, and we just kind of have a different philosophy when it comes to farming and agriculture. So, I guess I'll just start by introducing myself. Once again, I am the farm manager here at our Young Living Lavender Farm in Mona, Utah. But prior to that, I grew up on a farm. I'm originally from Washington State, and grew up on a very traditional row crop farm there. We grew a lot of beans and peas and alfalfa hay and corn and potatoes and a lot of different things. And so I'm also a fifth generation farmer. And so it's just kind of something that's in my heritage, in my blood. I don't really recall ever wanting to do anything else. I always wanted to be in agriculture. And let's see. And so, early on when I was young, my dad really encouraged me to get an education. He was like, Jason, if you want to stay in farming, if you want to stay in agriculture, you really need to understand the science behind agriculture. You got to understand what really makes things work. You got to understand the science of the soil and plant pathology and all those things. I would have been just happy staying on the farm and driving the tractor, but he's like, that just makes you a farmhand. That doesn't make you a manager. So I went on to school and I got my bachelor's degree in agricultural business management. And I also minored in agronomy, which really focuses on the science of everything. And I also have a minor in animal science as well. And so with that, I've been in agriculture. I've done a lot of different things. I worked for several years for an organic fertilizer company that specialized in organic fertilizer production. I managed farms in California. I worked for the second largest almond and pistachio grower in the world out of California. We had over 40,000 acres of almonds and pistachios. And now I'm here at Young Living and in a whole new field, or at least it was when I first started. But it's been an amazing journey, and I feel like a lot of the things that I've learned along the way have really led me to the path I am now, in regards to aromatic plants and distillation and the production of essential oils. So let's go ahead and jump into what I have to share with you about the farm. And I plan on at the end kind of doing a little Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, jot them down, and I'd be happy to try to tackle them at the end of this presentation. So here we go. I'll tell you just a little bit about the farm. So this here is kind of an aerial view of the map of the farm. It is everything that you see outlined there. This is in Mona, Utah. We have a little over 1,300 acres that you see outlined in red. And then recently, just a couple of years ago, we purchased the property that you kind of see over here in purple, about 400 acres there. So, and we purchased that primarily for the water rights. In the Western United States, everything revolves around how much water you have. And so you always got to have enough land and water to grow the crops that you want to grow. And so we needed extra water. And so we were able to purchase that ground. So some of the things that we grow here at our farm, lavender, everybody assumes that's the only thing we grow, but we actually grow Melissa, goldenrod, clary sage, blue yarrow, hyssop, and hay. because we have about 140 horses or so. And so the other thing that we produce is juniper. We produce probably more juniper oil than anything here. I didn't list it under things that we grow because juniper is something that we harvest out in the wild. It's not grown here on the farm. We actually we go on and make land contracts with local owners, and from close by the farm. We typically don't go more than an hour, half an hour away from where we're at, and so. But all that juniper is brought here to our distillery and distilled. So obviously, if we talked about seed to sale, everything starts with the seed. And a question that I get frequently is, where does your seed come from? And it's interesting, because a lot of people maybe assume we go and buy outside seed or whatever. But no, here at our farm, we're constantly collecting seed from our plants here on the farm. And the reason that's so important is because it's really to protect that original integrity, DNA integrity from the plants that Gary originally. A lot of you have probably heard the story, at least with lavender, about he found some wild lavender plants in the mountains of France, collected seeds off them and brought them back to the United States, originally planted some of those plants in Spokane, Washington. He continued to collect seed, eventually planted them at our farm in St. Mary's, again, continued to collect seed. And then when he purchased this farm here in Mona, Utah, brought some more seeds to us here. The reason that's so important is because many people don't really realize when it comes to lavender, when it comes to really anything, there are dozens and dozens and hundreds of varieties out there. Lavender, especially, there's several hundred varieties of lavender. And even though some of them look exactly the same, but the oil profiles are not the same. And really the way that we have so many different varieties is because a lot of them have been hybridized and they've been genetically modified to produce certain characteristics. And and Gary didn't want that. He wanted to find something that was the least adulterated, the most natural. And so that's why it's proprietary. And it's important for us to constantly collect seeds so that we always have that genetic line. And so the same goes with all of our other seeds. Once we find a plant and genetics that we like, we're constantly collecting those seeds and storing them. And so when we do collect seeds, everything is all the seed is cleaned for the most part by hand. That's what you kind of see in this picture. It's hard to tell, but that's actually a fine mesh screen. And then once we get it down to the clean seed form, then we put it in these, for the most part, these dark glass jars. And they're dark so that light doesn't penetrate, because just like your essential oils, light will essentially make that seed degrade in quality. So we want the seed to last as long as we can. And then it's held in cold storage. And that, if you ever come to the farm, you'll see some of these cold storage units that look like this, these large refrigeration units, where a lot of this seed is stored. And even some of our bulk seed, that's kind of what this bottom picture is. This is, some seed we need it to hold in large quantities, like clary sage, because it's a bigger seed. And so it's held in stainless steel containers. And then this is a large storage, cold storage unit. So that's just a little bit about seed. And then obviously that we use that seed to plant lavender and a lot of other things. Typically we grow anywhere from 2 million, usually 2 million is about the maximum, actually 500,000 to 2 million plants every year, just depending on what's going on each year. And everything for the most part starts out in the greenhouse.
Hey, Jake.
Yeah.
Not to interrupt, but it's just that picture stood out to me with the seed containers. Last time we were at the farm for the tour that you did with us, you were actually showing us those containers. and allowing us to smell the seeds and all that. And so just to kind of bring everyone into that room, could you go over just real quick and mention the lavender seeds, if I'm remembering right, they smelled exactly like our oils, right? Is that correct? But there was others that you were mentioning, the smells are all different. Could you talk about that real quick? Because that was pretty cool for you just to stand there in front of that refrigerator and open up these containers of seeds. They felt like time capsules. Like,
Yeah.
here. But that was very interesting to me. That stood out to me as you were showing me those.
Yeah, no, you bet. Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting about lavender. And it's actually pretty unique because most plants are not like this, but lavender smells like lavender from start to finish. You open up one of these jars of lavender, and it's a rich aroma of lavender. Obviously the plant, you know, if you were to come to our greenhouse, or those of you who've been to the farm and you rub the plant and you smell it, it smells like lavender. And then the oil obviously smells like lavender as well. A lot of plants are not like that. Hyssop is one in particular that is interesting. The seeds don't really have any kind of aromatic scent. The plant has kind of a skunky smell, to be quite honest. It has a kind of a, you know, not the most pleasant smell of the plant, but the oil, and I've got one right here on my desk. It actually kind of has a really sweet, pleasant aroma, and so it's just kind of different. So yeah, and so that's one of the things I really like about lavender. It smells like lavender from beginning to end. You know, the next thing I want to talk about is soil. After seed, the most important thing on the farm for us is having healthy soil. This picture here is just an example of a soil analysis. So any good farmer is going to send in a soil sample and get it analyzed every year from his farm. He's going to do that on every field. And so we're the same. Well, we send in soil samples out of every field, send it to a lab and get it analyzed. So we want to know what's in it, right? We want to know all these different nutrient levels: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, all these micronutrients, all the minerals. We want to know what's in it. We want to know what organic matter levels are, pH levels of the soil. And so every farmer typically will do that. And this is where it kind of gets different. This is what's different about Young Living and probably your typical conventional farm. And when I say conventional, that basically means, you know, a farmer that's using chemicals, essentially, chemical fertilizers and pesticides, herbicides, things like that. Basically, when you get one of these soil reports back, they're going to show you what you have, but then they're also going to make a recommendation. They're going to say, okay, based on what you're growing, you're deficient in these different nutrients or minerals. And so we recommend, and the lab just does this for you, we recommend that you put on X amount of pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Okay, and so they're going to make a recommendation to the farmer. And the typical farmer then is going to go to his fertilizer dealer and he's going to say, hey, can you whip me up a mix of all these, of a fertilizer mix that matches this criteria so I can put it onto this field. And so the farmer will then purchase this custom mix. You guys have probably all seen these little fertilizer pellets, these, you know, conventional or synthetic pellets. Some of you maybe are guilty of putting some of this on your lawn for fertilizer, right? Okay. And so this is all like basically a synthetic petroleum-based, salt-based fertilizer. It's synthetic, it's not natural. And so, but your typical conventional farmer will put this on their field. And by the way, I want to make sure that what I'm pointing out is that my intent is not to say anything bad about conventional farmers, because most of my friends are conventional farmers, people I grew up with, and you know, they think I'm the crazy one for being an organic farmer. So I have no negative feelings towards them. My point is just to kind of show you the difference. And so that's kind of the point, is they want to match a fertilizer and apply it to the field and try to match whatever that plant is taking out. Well, Young Living, our approach is different. You know, we want to know all this, but the main thing we're looking at is, like, I want to see the organic matter year to year. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is our pH changing? You know, some of our nutrients in the soil, are they staying about the same? Are we removing some? I want to see that. But really my focus is what's going down under the soil in terms of microbial life. I want to make sure that we maintain healthy microbial communities. That means communities of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, beneficial nematodes, that is. And because really what their job is in the soil is to take, you know, your plants are going to sequester carbon out of the air and put that carbon into the soil. And then all those microbes in the soil essentially convert the carbon, they convert the organic matter into a usable form of fertilizer. And we've found that if we just take care of that, microbial life in the soil, those microbes take care of the plants. We haven't found the need to add on synthetic fertilizers. Because really what ends up happening, if you put this stuff on your fields over and over and over for years and years, what do you think happens to this microbial life in your soil? It starts to die and go away. And once you lose that activity, that's when your plants become more prone to diseases and prone to pests. Well, now pests, it's become more susceptible to pests and diseases. Well, now you've got to spray on more fungicides, pesticides. It becomes this never-ending process of having to put on all these synthetic chemicals on your field. What we've found is as long as we keep this area in the soil clean and pure and protected, they take care of a lot of that. If you ask me how many pests and diseases I have to deal with on our farm, it's almost zero. The biggest thing I have to deal with are weeds, because the weeds thrive in this environment too, because they're a plant, right? But when it comes to pests, diseases, they're almost non-existent for us. So what are the things, how do we maintain the healthy microbiome in the soil? Well, one of the main things is compost. We're putting down a lot of compost every year. So we take all of our distilled plant material, after lavender, goldenrod, whatever it may be, Melissa, after we distill it, and we take that plant material and we mix it with our manure from our horses. On top of that, we add microbiology to the compost to help break down carbon. So then when it all goes back onto the fields in the form of fertilizer. These are just some pictures of our fertilizer application. So we put on, anywhere from 5 to 10 tons per acre of compost every year. And that compost is just full of life. It's full of microbiology. Everything that the microbiome in our soil loves. The other thing that we do is we always have a healthy rotation of cover crops. And I know this picture here kind of looks like that fertilizer that I showed you earlier, but it's not. It's actually a mix of different seeds. And so we're of cover crops. And so we're always incorporating healthy plants in our soil. So like say after 10 years, when a lavender field is done, we want to come back in and get some biodiversity. It's had 10 years of lavender roots in that soil. Now we want to add something else to the soil. We want some biodiversity. So we put in a lot of legumes like peas, clovers, things like that. Daikon radish, that helps to break up compaction in your soil. Sorghum Sudan grass, that helps to sequester carbon. It actually also acts as a natural fumigant that does help to kill any negative nematodes that might be in the soil or other pests that might be in the soil. We don't have a lot of them, but that's what sorghum Sudan grass naturally does. And so we kind of have this healthy rotation going on. Let's see. So I kind of want to talk about some things that we've developed in the last few years. So I've been with the company about 4 years, and I did not get to know Gary as much as I would have liked to. He interviewed me for my position, for my job, but unfortunately he passed away not long after I was hired. And so I didn't get a lot of time with him, but the time when I was hired, one of the things he really emphasized, and it was an interesting interview in and of itself. We mostly just drove around in his pickup around the farm and looked at the farm, and he would ask me questions and I'd ask him questions. And one of the things he kept asking me and emphasizing was, are you an out of the box thinker? How do you solve problems? How do you, he had a lot of questions around that. And he was very open to the fact that we don't know everything. We don't have it all figured out. Things change, things evolve. How do you handle problems as they come about? How do you improve upon processes? And so he had a lot of those questions. And that's because with agriculture and farming, things are always changing and evolving. And so I want to talk about some of the things that have kind of changed in the last few years at the farm. One of the things that I noticed right away when I was hired was how much labor it took to control weeds on it. We were at the time hiring around 100 people just to control weeds, because obviously we're not using chemicals to control them, so we need people. And I could see that just was not a sustainable number, one, because it's real expensive, and two, because you're not always going to find that many people that want to do that kind of work. I've been in agriculture a long time, and I've just seen the number of people that actually want to work that way is going down and down and down. And I've seen it in the last few years. I actually tried to hire 80 people this year, and I was only able to hire 60, just because I just couldn't find any more people. And so, as I thought about that, we thought about, okay, how can we become less dependent on a labor force? And so these pictures that you see here are kind of a result of that. So we started with this weed barrier, this what we call a permanent weed barrier. And our goal there was kind of mimic the way lavender likes to grow. Lavender likes a real rocky soil. And that's because rocks are constantly absorbing sunlight. And it keeps the soil warm. And so we put down this weed barrier. We started with some small trials. And then in between, we planted an inter-row cover crop. And that was to essentially choke out the weeds. What we found, and our goal was just to reduce our dependency upon labor. But what we found was that this practice became so much more healthier, I guess you could say, for the soil. These are some of the things that we found when doing this. We ended up with larger, more uniform plants that require less water, because that fabric was shading the ground. And so rather than when we would water, that soil moisture would stay there rather than just being dried out by the sun. The inter-row cover crop, typically what we would do is go up and down in between the rows with a cultivator and turn up the soil. That's the only way, one of the ways you can really only control weeds. And we found that first of all, by doing that, you're releasing carbon into the air, and you're reducing that microbial life every time you turn up the soil. The best thing for that microbial life is to leave it alone, not turn up that soil. And so by having that cover crop there, it's constantly sequestering carbon, putting it into the soil, and pumping in the soil full of nutrients. Anyway, long story short, this has been a great process for us. We've been able to reduce some of our costs, but it's also just become a more healthier practice for our soil, for our farm. And then sheep. Everybody loves the sheep. So let's see, last year we were basically what we do is when this cover crop, when it was first established, would get really tall, we'd come in with a mower and mow the cover crop down. And we're having to do that 5 or 6 times a year. And I was talking to our farm manager in France, Nicholas Landell. Some of you may know him. He's like, hey, we've been using sheep out here and it's been working really well, because they actually leave the lavender alone. It's not a very palatable plant form. It has a strong aromatic scent. They don't like to eat it. So as long as there's weeds or other things there, they'll eat the weeds first. And so we started introducing sheep, and it's worked out great. In fact, there's still, here we are in October, there's still 300 or 400 sheep here on my farm. And so we started trying it in some of our other crops. Well, we know they don't like lavender, but how about goldenrod? How about blue yarrow, clary sage? And it's worked out great in almost all of those. They don't like Melissa. They don't like goldenrod. They don't like the clary sage. Now the thing is, though, you got to watch them. They will, if there's nothing else left, they will start to eat those plants. But they love blue yarrow. If you put them in a blue yarrow field, that's the first thing they'll eat. So we can't put them in blue yarrow at all. So anyway, just kind of interesting the way the sheep have worked out. Oh, here's a little video of the sheep frolicking. And so this is early in the spring. The lavender is still dormant. That's why it looks brown. So it hasn't quite woken up out of its dormancy yet. But you watch how the sheep they jump over the rows. They don't stomp on it, step on it. They tread pretty lightly. And yeah, they've been doing great for us. Some other, sustainable farming practices. This is pollinators. This is one of the things I'm really passionate about, is pollinators. When I worked in California and farming almonds have to have pollinators. They have to have bees, essentially honeybees, to pollinate almonds, because almonds is a heavy, sticky pollen. It doesn't get blown around by the wind. So you have to have an insect carry the pollen around and pollinate things. And so I would work with beekeepers to bring in somewhere in the neighborhoods of 40,000 beehives every year to pollinate almonds. And so I consider myself a very novice beekeeper, something I enjoy. And so we work with local beekeepers to bring bees to the farm and pollinate our fields. And one of the things that a commercial beekeeper, a beekeeper that does it full time, one of the things that first thing he'll ask you, any farmer, is what do you spray on your crops? What kind of chemicals are you using? And I can't tell you how much it pleases me to no end to be able to say nothing. It will spray anything on our crops. And so, because what happens when you spray a chemical on a crop? That chemical ends up in the crop. It ends up in the food. It ends up in the oil, whatever it is you're producing. The chemicals are there. And so beekeepers are a real tight-knit community. And yeah, we have beekeepers knocking down our doors to come put their bees at our farm, because it's probably one of the healthiest places in Utah to keep bees. You have 1,700 acres of no chemical use. And so yeah, we also plant a lot of different native floral species around the farm to try to attract butterflies and other pollinators. We have a monarch way station. We planted a plot of milkweed to aid the migration of monarch butterflies that fly from Mexico all the way to the Arctic. They love milkweed. And so yeah, we're continuing trying to do things in that regard. Irrigation optimization, that's something we're, being in the desert, we got to be careful with our water. So we're constantly trying to be efficient with our water. Over the last few years, we started switching over some of our fields to drip irrigation to try to minimize our water usage as well. The other thing, again, some things that have changed, in the last few years, we've kind of experimented with some the way we plant things. When I first got here, we were planting everything just like lavender, meaning in hedgerows, just like this. And so these plants are planted 66 inches apart, and which makes sense for lavender, right? But then I started asking the questions like, well, why do we plant Melissa this way? Why do we plant goldenrod this way? Why do we plant blue yarrow this way? And a lot of the responses I was getting was just like, well, that's just what we've always done. And so we started experimenting with planting things tighter together, because my feeling was, if we can plant things tighter together, it will close in these rows, and we wouldn't have to come in and cultivate, turn up the soil so much, because you close it, it'll shade the ground, it'll choke out weeds, it'll retain moisture. And so we started experimenting with different crops on where that made sense. And we've had a lot of good success with it. And so this is a Melissa field where typically there'd be a big gap between rows. And these plants are planted 30 inches apart, as opposed to the lavender that's 66 inches. And it's worked out great. It's, again, as you can see, it's shaded out a lot of the weeds. It's retained soil moisture. But not only that, but we're able to get twice as many plants per acre, which increase yields. I don't know how many of you heard of criticism about essential oils. One of the things that I hear is, that's not sustainable because it takes so many acres to produce a little bit of oil. And so we're conscious of that. And so this style has enabled us to produce more oil per acre. And so that's something that, when people ask me, how's that sustainable? Well, this is one way. This is one of the things that we're doing differently, is we're able to plant them tighter together and get more yield per acre. Again, blue yarrow, we tried it with that, and it's worked out great as well. These rows that you see here are about 30 inches apart, as opposed to 66 inches apart. So closed everything in. So we're using a lot less water. There's less weed pressure, so we don't have to send crews through to weed things out. And so yeah, it's worked out really good. Another thing that we've really focused on in terms of water is our distillery. I don't know how many of you know this, but distilleries actually use a lot of water. And when you're in the deserts of Utah, you've got to be conscious of that. And so essentially what we've done is we've redesigned our distillery so that, let me back up. The way distilleries typically work is water comes in, the steam goes up through the kettles. I won't go through the whole process of distillation, but essentially the end product, you have hydrosol and then you have oil. And there's large amounts of hydrosol. And in the past, that hydrosol would just have to be discarded. And then you also have cooling water. Cooling water has to come in and cool our condensers. And again, the way it used to be, it would come in, it would cool, and then it would just go out and be discarded. And so we've redesigned the distillery to have a closed loop system. And so all the cooling water goes in, cools the condensers, comes back out into this cooling tower, cools the water back down, and then it goes back in. It's in this constant loop. And then our floral water goes out, or our hydrosol goes out to a holding pond on our farm. See, it used to go out and have to be discarded. Now it comes to this holding pond. When this pond gets full, it's pumped out into underground lines that actually tie into our irrigation system. So that floral water mixes with our irrigation system. It goes back onto our fields in the form of irrigation water. And so because of this, not a single drop of water is wasted. Not a single one. So how much water have we saved? Well, enough to farm another 200 acres of ground if we needed to. But really total gallons is about 270 million gallons of water is what the redesign of our distillery saves us. And this is, one of the things I love about Mary Young is she realizes the type of investments that need to happen as we move into the future and we become more sustainable. She's willing to it cost a lot of money to redesign that distillery, and she's been willing to do that. And then kind of, the last portion of towards the end of my presentation here, the other thing, we've been really focusing on is member experience. So when all of you come to the farm, you have a good time and you enjoy it. And so we've kind of worked on putting out more signs. When you go and you look at something, you see a field and you see a trial or something that's going on, experiment, we kind of have signs out to explain what's happening. And I really wish, I need to update my presentation here because I don't know how many of you have been to the farm this year, but you'll see there's a new visitor center. We've completely redesigned our ponds that are in the middle of our park, our upper pond. We put in a splash pad. And there's just all kinds of things going on. I mean, if you haven't, it's almost unrecognizable, some parts of the farm. The new visitor center went from 2,500 square feet to I don't know, what is it now? 6,000 square feet, something like that. It's a bed and breakfast. There's a cafe in there now. And so anyway, Mary is really dedicated to improving that experience when you guys come to the farm. Oh yeah, our events that we have here are selling out. This picture is taken from our fall festival rodeo. And these are the stadiums that are completely packed. And so this year we're probably going to add on to this end of the stadium and just keep adding more seating. More people keep coming. Of course, you can't talk about Mona Farm without talking about Gary's horses. His love of horses and his passion was just incredible. His Percherons especially. So in 2018, they won the World Percheron Congress. And so that's something that comes around every 4 years. It's kind of like the Olympics of the Percheron draft horse show. And so they won it in 2018. And so coming up here in 2022, they'll defend their title again for the Congress. And then they also compete every year in the 6-horse Classic Series finals. That's kind of like the Super Bowl for them. They won it 2 years ago. I think they got second place last year, and then we won it again this year for 2020. So very happy. And then, of course, you have the Frisian horses that are constantly traveling around all the rodeos, dancing and prancing and doing their thing. So they've all been great ambassadors for you. I just want to finish with this quote, and then we'll open it up to questions. This, again, I didn't get to know Gary very well, and I got this quote from one of the other farm managers. This is something that Gary quite frequently would preach to the farm managers, and it's, God has given us something important. Not only the seeds we plant, crops we grow, and natural resources we use to grow them, but the knowledge, tools, and technologies we apply, colleagues we work with, and the people we serve. So remember that when we cultivate our fields, grow our crops, distill our oils, manage our teams, and interact with all the people we come into contact with, that we must care about how we do it. The reason I really like that quote is because it's more than just farming, right? Here he is talking about farming, but he's talking about everything that goes along with it. How do you treat your teams? How do you treat the people? How do you treat Mother Earth in regards to this? And so that's why I really like that. So with that, before I open it up to questions, I want to say thank you to you guys. You guys, I see in the comments and you're thanking me, and a lot of you have reached out to me at different times to thank me and the farm staff. And I just want to say on behalf of the farm staff here, how much we appreciate you guys. You are the ones that are taking this message to your friends, your family, to the masses, really. You're the real ambassadors for Young Living. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't have jobs. So again, I just want to say on behalf of our farm and our farm staff, how much we appreciate you guys. So thank you. But typically, the first event we have is in April. We do an Easter event. Then of course there's in June, we typically would have the convention. Still not sure. Hopefully that's going to be in person this next year, but I'm not sure. Because I'd love to have people back And then we have, you know, Lavender Day, the day that happens in July. Um, then the Fall Festival, Christmas again. So those are kind of your typical events. Then in between all those, you know, we have Silver Retreat. Sometimes we have different diamond events here, and those kind of get scheduled, you know, as needed. But yeah, those are some of the events. I see lots of questions kind of pop. Somebody said favorite oil, Citrus Fresh is my favorite oil. I feel like that just pairs well with everything. I'm always put lavender and Citrus Fresh together. Favorite product is a CBD muscle rub. It's done wonders for me. I used to have to take like 3 extra strength Excedrin, my, you know, headache medicine almost every day until I started trying that, and now I haven't had to use Excedrin at all. That's just to help my headaches. And so let me see here. I probably ought to pop this chat window open and see. How do you extend the season? How early can you? Okay, Utah definitely has cold winter. How do you extend the season? How early can you start planting? Yeah, here's the thing. Mother Nature dictates all of that. You know, one of the things I like to say is that farming is 80% Mother Nature, 10% luck. And so typically we start things in the greenhouse in February, and then we'll start planting in, it depends on the plant. Lavender is usually May. Goldenrod we can start a little bit early, sometimes mid-April. How do you extend the season? There's no really extending it. Mother Nature dictates, you know, all of that. And so yeah, hopefully that answers your question. How long can water remain in the cooling loop before it needs to be changed out? If you ever do have to change it out, if so, what do you do with the used cooling water? So the used cooling water, so it's tested weekly, not just to make sure that there's not a buildup of calcium and things like that, because it is hard water. It comes right from our well. We change it out just once a year. There's no issues with contamination. That the cooling water never touches the essential oil. It just cools down the condenser. And so yeah, it's and then what do we do with it? It gets pumped into that same holding pond with the hydrosol and gets put back out on the fields. Question: our city collects compost with dog poop and sells it back to use in gardens. Is that a good thing? You know, I get questions like that a lot. So one of the things that I did when I worked for I worked for an organic fertilizer company, is we built over 100,000 tons of compost a year. The rule of thumb with compost is it's not best to have manure source from carnivores or omnivores. So those typically are your animals like dogs. That's interesting that they collect large quantities of it. First of all, a little strange to me. But pigs are omnivores. Anything that has like meat typically is not a great compost. So I certainly wouldn't put it on my garden. Now, if you're going to put it on your lawn or something, that's different because you're not eating your lawn. But certainly wouldn't put it on anything I would use to eat vegetables from like that. So hopefully that answers your question. Local events are also held at the stadium area. Yeah, they are. We use that stadium we put on 3 or 4 different rodeos a year. That's what that stadium was primarily built for, was for rodeos. Gary loved rodeos. So. Can people still visit the farm as an individual, not during an event? Currently, right now, no, unfortunately. Mainly because of all of our construction projects we have going on. It's just too dangerous. People start wandering around and the backhoe doesn't see them and they get run over or something like that. So as of right now, we've just asked people not to come individually. Hopefully that'll change in 2022. Is the water savings you mentioned, is that the amount per year? Yeah, that 270 million gallons of water That's per year. So every year we're saving that amount of why do we not have our own beehives? We could sell honey. I know. Actually, we do have our own beehives. We contract with local beekeepers. We actually have a few of our own beehives. You know, we've talked about selling it in the store. Europe has some lavender honey that's grown on our farms in France. Young Living honey that sometimes you can purchase. I don't know how or where. I don't know if it's only available in select markets. We've talked about doing it here. We might do it in the future. It's just you start getting into some laws when it comes to food production. We'd have to turn the farm more into a food production type farm. There's certifications and licenses that are involved with that, and so I'm just busy, haven't got to that step yet. Are some hydrosols sold? Not yet, but that is something we are looking into as well. Yeah, that's all I can really say about that, but it wouldn't surprise me in the future if we start selling some hydrosols. Are there some plants that you found that you could not grow in Utah? Yeah. Every so often our R&D department will come to us and say, hey, can you grow this? Can you try to grow this? It's got a great oil profile. And so yeah, we're constantly experimenting with things to see how well they grow. A lot of things will grow, may not grow well. So like a plant called Dragonhead was one we experimented with a couple of years ago. For what the R&D department told me is the oil profile is similar to Melissa on steroids. And so they thought it'd be a great thing if we could grow something like that. And so for 2 years, we tried to grow it, and it grows here. The problem is it's a very fragile plant. And so every year we planted it, we get these bitter cold winds in the spring, and a cold wind would come through and I had it wipe out 60 acres of Dragonhead. And so, yeah, we're always running into those kinds of things as we're experimenting. What do you do with the honey? Most of it we leave in the hives, so the bees have something to eat. And the rest of it we actually extract and we give it to our employees here. So that's kind of what we're doing with it currently. We used to be able to buy YL farm honey a long time ago. Okay, yeah. Again, maybe that was kind of in the wild, wild west days when Gary just did what he wanted, bottled it and sold it. But hopefully we can get there again where I don't think it'll be something sold online. It might be something sold in our storefront here on the farm when you visit in person. Coffee someday. Yeah, I don't know. That's out of my area. Coffee definitely would not grow in this environment here. It's more of a tropical kind of plant, so I'm not sure there. What plant was Melissa on steroids? It's called Dragonhead is the name of the plant. We don't, our Ecuador farm tried to grow it too. It's just a really fragile plant. Not a lot of luck. If you're on Facebook, I try to do a lot of videos and just to show you what's kind of going on. Gives you a little more idea, more detail of the day-to-day stuff. I see a couple questions about FFA, Future Farmers of America. We have worked different times with some youth in the local area. We donate to a lot of the local chapters, FFA groups as well. So we do some work there. So anyway, that was one of the questions I saw. So that's all I have. So I'll sign off. I know you guys are continuing on with some business calls and